The Rock of Gibraltar ranks among one of the most contested locations in Europe. Due to its strategic location at the Mediterranean Sea and Atlantic Ocean intersection, the small port city has endured 14 major sieges since 1309. The Marinid Kingdom in Morocco, the Kingdom of Castile, the Emirate of Granada, Spain, France, Great Britain and the United Provinces of the Netherlands all at one point or another either attacked or defended the walls of the Rock. In today's episode, we will focus on the Great Siege of 1779 to 1783, an epic conflict which ensured that Gibraltar would remain in British hands to this day. This video is made possible thanks to the generous support of our YouTube members and patrons. Their contributions are the backbone of our work. As a token of our appreciation, our patrons and YouTube members enjoy 2 exclusive videos every week. Currently, they have access to a complete series on Xenophon's Anabasis, the First Punic War, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, and numerous other fun videos. Additionally, our Pacific War series is ongoing, and we're excited to announce the release of a new series on the Russo-Japanese War and Albigensian Crusades, and much more, exclusively for our backers. If you want to join this fantastic community, you can find the links in the video description and pinned comment. By becoming a patron or YouTube member, you'll gain access to exclusive videos, early access to all our public content, release schedules, wallpapers, and an invitation to our active Discord server where we engage in lively discussions. Your support is invaluable, and we sincerely thank you for making our work possible. At the onset of the War of Spanish Succession, Gibraltar had been firmly in Spanish hands for the past 2 centuries. But on July 24, 1704, the Rock fell to an amphibious Anglo-Dutch invading force, who easily defeated its small garrison. The Spanish and their French allies immediately tried to retake Gibraltar, launching a siege in August 1704. After a naval defeat in March of 1706, the French abandoned the siege, which turned into a low-intensity blockade that was equally ineffective at weakening the Anglo hold on the Rock. By the war's end in 1713, Gibraltar was firmly in British hands. Interestingly, the capture of Gibraltar was originally not a primary war aim from the British, who had seized it on behalf of their ally, the Austrian claimant to the Spanish throne. But the English crown soon realised the strategic potential the harbour possessed in strengthening the Royal Navy's presence in the Mediterranean. British control over Gibraltar was formalised on July 13, 1713, with the signature of the Peace and Friendship Treaty between Spain and Great Britain, a subdivision of the Treaties of Utrecht, which put an end to the War of Spanish Succession. With these treaties, Britain and its allies conceded the throne in Madrid to the Franco-Spanish claimant. In exchange, the new Spanish king, King Philip V, ceded the Balearic island of Minorca and Gibraltar to Britain. In the words of the treaty, the king gave up the said propriety to be held and enjoyed absolutely with all manner of right forever without any exception or impediment whatsoever. In the following years, the British Crown made vague overtures to Spain about returning Gibraltar, but Philip V appeared uninterested. The king had a change of heart in February of 1727, when 20,000 Spanish troops amassed north of Gibraltar, ready to take on its 5,000-strong garrison. But this siege resulted in little action, judging by the memoirs of an English soldier stationed on the Rock at the time. Here is nothing to do, nor any news, all things being dormant and in suspense, with the harmless diversions of drinking, dancing, revelling, whoring, and gambling. 18th century English soldiers clearly had a different understanding of nothing to do. After months of costly yet indecisive mutual bombardment, Philip V called off the siege in June 1727. The Peace Treaty of Seville in 1729 restored the status quo ante bellum. During the globe-spanning 7 Years' War of 1756 to 1763, Gibraltar was used as a base of operations by the British Royal Navy, but was never directly threatened by Britain's enemies. In the following decade, it would once again become a hotspot as an indirect consequence of the American Revolution. While King George was occupied with his rebellious subjects across the Atlantic, A Franco-Spanish alliance, which also supported the rebels in America, saw an occasion to recover territories lost to Britain during previous conflicts. In the case of the Spanish, these war aims included the reconquest of Minorca and of course Gibraltar. On April 12, 1779, Spain and France concluded a secret military alliance against Britain. On June 16th, King Carlos III of Spain declared war on George III, deploying a large force against Gibraltar. This included 6,000 infantry and cavalry amassing north of the Rock under General Mendoza, and later General Sotomayor. Moreover, two fleets, deploying 246 cannons, threatened the British possession from the waters of the bay. On the flip side, the governor of Gibraltar, General George Augustus Elliot, could count on a garrison of 5,400 British and Hanoverian soldiers, 663 artillery pieces, and 5 ships under Vice Admiral Robert Duff. By June 21st, the Spanish fleets, under Vice Admiral Barceló, had completed the blockade of Gibraltar, aiming to starve out the defenders. Governor Elliot, himself an austere vegetarian, established a rationing system and ordered his soldiers not to powder their hair with flour, as required by army regulations, to conserve food stocks. The British garrison's concerns over provisions were further alleviated as daring freebooters and smugglers dodged the blockade to deliver supplies to them. On July 5th, 3 privateers dared to sneak past the Spanish line. When a Spanish schooner, disguised as a Portuguese vessel, tried to intercept them, Elliot's gunners opened fire, driving away the treacherous ship. These were the first shots fired during the siege. By early September, the Spanish troops behind the siege lines had increased to 15,000. Engineers were busy digging trenches and erecting artillery batteries along the main fortified line, stretching across the isthmus from Fort St. Barbara to Fort St. Philip. On September 12th, the British gunners on the north face of the Rock unleashed a heavy bombardment to slow down the Spanish works. The besiegers responded in turn, and artillery exchanges continued in the following days, but with scarce effect on both sides. After this, the siege stagnated to a point where British artillerymen grew so bored that their officers had to formally forbid them from taking alcohol and sex workers to their batteries. Boredom was compounded by malnourishment and a smallpox outbreak, resulting in plummeting morale and several deserters fleeing to the Spanish lines. At the end of December, the Spanish besiegers resumed operations, targeting advanced outposts and foraging expeditions on the isthmus. Elliot and his garrison had to tighten the belt, but help was on its way. On January 26, 1780, Royal Navy Admiral Rodney entered the bay with a large squadron, escorting a precious convoy of supplies. Rodney's crew included a young midshipman of renown, the future King William IV. At 14 years old, the young prince had fully embraced the life of a sailor, and while in transit, he went on a bender with his fellow seamen, glugging down pints of grog and engaging in a drunken fistfight. On the night of June 7, 1780, another supply convoy approached the harbour in the darkness. But the captain of the British vessel HMS Enterprise listened to the advice of an admiral from another franchise and opened fire. It was a trap. The convoy was in fact a squadron of 9 Spanish fireships, which erupted into flames as they drifted towards Vice Admiral Duff's vessels. The Garrison and HMS Panther opened fire from their batteries, successfully slowing the advance of the floating, flaming mountains. As a providential breeze blew the fireships southwards, teams of sailors braved the inferno in their rowboats, grappled the Spanish vessels with iron hooks, and towed them away. Enterprise and Panther saw further action on the 24th and 27th of June, engaging with several small Spanish craft. Neither engagement resulted in substantial casualties. The most dangerous threat so far faced by Governor Elliot was the aforementioned smallpox outbreak, which had claimed 500 victims by August 1780. On October 1st, the Spanish decided to give Elliot another headache when they began another heavy bombardment from their batteries. The British defensive positions were high enough up the north face of the rock not to be too worried, but some shots managed to land beyond the walls. In a stroke of logistical genius, Elliot had the town streets ploughed into deep furrows to deflect the rolling cannonballs. The siege continued without major incidents until April 12, 1781, when Admiral Derby approached the harbour with a heavily escorted convoy of 97 merchantmen. The Spanish Vice Admiral Barceló did not attempt to engage Derby's fleet, but his gunners did their best to hamper the unloading operations of vital supplies. As Elliot's men hastened to unload the cargo in the new mole, some 130 guns rained lead and fire upon them. At the same time, Sotomayor's land forces opened fire from the north, setting alight parts of Gibraltar Old Town. As timber houses were torn apart by Spanish shots, the garrison discovered that many civilians had been hoarding ample supplies of alcohol. This led to a total breakdown in discipline, as the troops engaged in a binge-drinking spree. Elliot's Hanoverian soldiers, less inclined to drink, helped restore order, and several looters were hanged on the spot. The Spanish artillery continued targeting the old town and the defences in the following days. The rate of fire was far from intense, yet it caused a continuous trickle of casualties. It was reported that an unfortunate soldier was in the office privy easing nature when a ball took off his head and left his body, the only remains, to finishing nature's cause. Sotomayor was inclined to inflict more casualties, and during June 1781 ordered the construction of 4 new batteries, adding 49 pieces of artillery to his panoply. The siege works continued until October, as approach trenches snaked progressively closer to the rock. On November 21st, 2 deserters entered Gibraltar and informed Elliot that the Spanish troops now numbered 21,000 and were planning further forward works. The governor decided to launch a preemptive strike, a sortie against the besiegers' lines. This attack was scheduled on the night of the 26th and 27th of November 1781. Overall operation command was entrusted to Brigadier General Ross, who would lead 2,014 troops split into 3 columns. The right-hand column led the attack, advancing through Forbes Barrier just before 3 AM on November 27th. The 3 columns cleared the patch of swampland known as Inundation Obstacle and approached the Spanish forward lines. In later conflicting reports, it appeared that these trenches had been manned only by between 80 and 400 troops. Clearly the besiegers had been taken entirely by surprise and hastily fell back. General Ross's men, covered by artillery atop the rock, took to levelling the Spanish fortifications, destroying batteries and filling ditches. They smashed the gun carriages and sabotaged 28 artillery pieces by driving iron spikes into their vents. Finally, they set about setting fire to supply stores and gunpowder magazines. At this stage, Governor Elliot joined the exciting expedition, to the surprise and dismay of General Ross. Elliot addressed Ross. "What do you think of this business? Is it not something extraordinary?" The gruff reply was, "Most extraordinary to find you here." Elliot personally saw to the demolition of the main Spanish powder magazine. Soon, all the depots blew up in ground-shaking detonations. The Spanish captain in charge of the arsenals, José Barbosa, died in the action. His report for the night, compiled before the attack, read, "Nothing extraordinary had happened." After recovering from the initial stupor of surprise, the Spanish began to fight back viciously, targeting the British and Hanoverians with grape shot, followed by a cavalry charge. But the Sortie columns were already returning to the fortress, and suffered only 4 dead and 25 wounded. It was a fruitless effort on the Spanish part, and did not change the fact that months of their engineering work had been devastated in little more than an hour. Despite their shaken morale, the Spanish immediately started rebuilding their forward batteries, completing the work by December. Logically, Elliot could have dared a second foray, but his troops were exhausted by another outbreak of disease, scurvy, which incapacitated 15% of the garrison. In February of 1782, the governor was stricken with more bad news. The British garrison defending Minorca had surrendered to a Franco-Spanish force. With one front closing, the Franco-Spanish allies could devote more troops against Gibraltar. Sure enough, in the following weeks, the besieging parties outside his walls increased to 35,000, led by a new commander, the French general Count de Crillon. In April, a Spanish deserter brought precious intelligence. De Crillon and his chief engineer, Garrison, were hatching a new plan to bombard Gibraltar's western side from the bay by using battering ships. 10 obsolete hulks were modified to become floating artillery batteries, fielding 212 guns. The guns and crews were protected by sloping roofs covered in rope netting and wet hides. The sides of the ships were constructed with layers of sand and cork. Garrison had also designed a system of water pumps and pipes to extinguish fires on board. Ironically, a man called Arson had conceived a method to protect his ships from arson. The chief engineer set to work in May. All the while, General de Crillon did his best to keep Elliot busy. On June 11th, a Spanish mortar scored a direct hit on a British powder magazine, lighting a massive explosion and causing 29 casualties. In July, freshly arrived French vessels engaged the Royal Navy in several small-scale battles as they carried more reinforcements to the siege lines. Elliot did not sit idle, and on September 8, 1782, all the British batteries along the fortifications opened fire, killing or wounding 300 French and Spanish troops. The besiegers returned fire over the following days, supported by a naval squadron firing broadsides from the bay. The defenders fought back against the enemy vessels, targeting them with red-hot shot, small cannon ammunition preheated in furnaces. These small rounds proved effective at setting the ship's timber on fire. But the day of the big showdown was drawing closer. On September 13th, the battering ships were towed into position in a single file parallel to the western walls of the rock. The 5 ships on the rear ran into sandbanks under the shallow waters and took little part in the subsequent action. The forward 5 ships, however, were more than enough to commence an awesome bombardment, sowing destruction on the seafront. The Gibraltar batteries responded to the fire, but Garrison's ingenious defences deflected even their heaviest rounds. Luckily for Elliot, the Franco-Spanish infantry on the north side of the rock showed little initiative, allowing him to concentrate against the attack from the sea. All the while, the British gunners' furnaces were hard at work, and by midday, they started spewing wheelbarrows full of red-hot shot. The bombardment with this type of ammo initially seemed to have little effect, as Garrison's measures kept the fires under control. But the red-hot shot, smouldering within the wooden planks, eventually did its job. The 2 leading battering ships, Talla Piedra and Pastora, were set alight in the evening. One after another, the other 3 leading vessels began to burst into flames. The 5 top ships were eventually consumed by fire or exploded around midnight. The remaining 5 were set alight and abandoned by their crews. A land attack, planned for the morning after, was eventually cancelled by General de Crillon, facing heavy losses without the artillery support from the battering ships. 2 weeks after the failed attack, a Royal Navy frigate brought more good news to Elliot. Admiral Howe was on his way with a relief convoy, which included 42 naval vessels and 31 merchantmen. Howe arrived in sight of Gibraltar on October 11th, but a strong gale from the west prevented him from landing, and the fleet was blown eastwards. The Franco-Spanish fleet, under Admiral Cordoba, gave chase into the Mediterranean. The skillful Howe managed to evade his pursuers, and on the 17th, his ships moored in Gibraltar. The admiral made it just in time to unload his cargo of food, ammunition, and 1,600 troops before Cordoba reappeared on the 19th. Howe set sail back to England, breaking away from Cordoba after a short battle west of Gibraltar. The Spanish admiral had his revenge on the night of October 23rd, when his gunboats sank the cutter Hector in the bay. Despite this, the besiegers dramatically reduced their activity, and many troops were observed leaving camp. Commander de Crillon was simply not interested in continuing a costly siege, especially now that France had achieved their broader war aims, namely supporting the American rebels to their victory and evicting Britain from Minorca. French Foreign Minister de Vergennes persuaded Carlos III's ministers to relinquish their claims on Gibraltar. In exchange, France would negotiate a handover of East Florida from Great Britain to Spain. The Spanish king reluctantly agreed, and on January 20, 1783, a preliminary truce was agreed. Peace was concluded on September 3rd with the Treaty of Versailles. At the end of the long conflict, Britain had lost the American colonies to the rebels, Minorca, Florida, and other West Indies possessions to Spain. But thanks to the innovative and unrelenting leadership of General George Eliot, the Rock of Gibraltar would remain part of the United Kingdom to this day. More videos on the colonial era are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Consider liking, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.